Freunde, willkommen bei Österreich. We are back once again to drive yet another new Mercedes Benz SUV. But unlike the almost 600 horsepower monster that was the GLE 63S Coupe we drove back in June, today we move up to the Grosse, the S-Class of the SUV world, the 2017, although it's not 2017 yet. Actually, it's not even 2016, it's 2015, but it's the 2017 GLS. Now, if you're going to haul around your dogs, your rugrats, and your horses, you need a V8. Preferably one with two turbos strapped to it. This particular case, 4.7 liters, puts out 449 horsepower and 516 pound-feet of torque. Comes in at a very low 1,800 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 4,000 RPM. Now, we've seen this engine before. We've seen this in the S-Class, and the kind of trend is to put turbochargers on slightly smaller V8s. Still calling it a GLS 500 in the rest of the world and GLS 550 in the US. I'm confused as to why they add the 50 for us, or even call it a GLS 500, as should be really a GLS 470, but I digress. Anyway, all that power and torque is great, but this, 5,070 pounds. So how does this mitigate this out there? So I feel like you and I have come to an unwritten rule that whenever we drive a new Mercedes Benz SUV, no matter what the size, we have to drive it in Österreich. And so here we are again, of course, in Österreich. But there is a difference. It is cold outside, like so cold that there's this white stuff on the ground. We don't have this in California Republic. You gotta find out what it is. But anyway, we're going uphill, we got a wet road, and really this is a great opportunity to talk about this pulling power out of a twin-turbo V8. Now, we talked about all the numbers and torque and all that kind of stuff. There's like this little hill here, there's no issue in pulling this big, heavy SUV up a hill and quickly. But what's really interesting about this, and I feel like this is more just me thing, because I come from the time of turbochargers were to make your car faster. They meant sportiness, or they made it cooler. But you know, nowadays car manufacturers are putting turbochargers in for more efficiency, to get more power out of a smaller engine. Think what we talked about in the Ferrari episode: CAFE requirements, CO2 emission tax schemes, and displacement tax schemes. So here's an opportunity where we kind of skirt around each one of those depending on the region of the world you live in, but you still have this wonderfully flat power curve, really not even a curve, just power band out of now a smaller V8, but I would say it was actually probably more pulling power than the normally aspirated V8 from only a couple of years ago. Good news, we're in the Tiroler Alpen. Bad news, we're in the Tiroler Alpen. I know, I'm confused too. Look at that over there, stunning beauty, but it is huge, which makes this look minute. And this is anything but minute. The wheelbase, 121 inches, the overall length, 202 inches. This is not an inconsequential amount of a vehicle, which means driving dynamics, how is that all gonna go? Now, you and I drove that GLE 450 and that GLE 63 Coupe, and that had the whiz-bang wizardry of like physics on the suspension that made the thing work, but it also had the oversized wheels. You don't have that here. So how does this all work in the Tiroler Alpen? Santa Maria Madre di Dios, or should I say, oh mein Gott. As we get to the top of this like valley thing here, look at the stunning beauty here. This is why you come to Österreich. Anyway, here we're getting into like a sort of pseudo tunnel kind of thing, but notice the road starts to get a little bit more twisty. This is a great opportunity for us to understand driving dynamics with this big of an SUV. Now, it's been a couple of years since you and I drove this, but there are a number of changes here. Number one, you get a couple more engine choices, but number two, they've added the airmatic suspension into this thing. So now the first thing you notice is it is significantly more stable, especially over some broken pavement here. Like this road, not terrible, but not perfect. And notice there's some undulations here. There's a couple, like for example, we've got a turn. Let's take this a little bit stronger than most people would that would own these things. Please don't try this at home. And you don't feel so much roll. Granted, there's a, like if I really were to put my foot into it, there's a little bit of squat in the rear. So now as the road gets even tighter, there's really two things going on here. Number one, any James Bond fans out there? I know I've told you guys many times I'm a huge Bond fan, like to the point, like me and my friends in university, we started literally a Bond club. It is called the James Bond Dinner Theater Foundation. Anyway, I digress. This very road we are on right now, this is where they shot that whole scene where the baddie was chasing, or like Bond was chasing the baddie with like the airplane on the snow. I'm giving it away if you haven't seen Spectre. And just I have to say, as a Bond fan, it is a return to the way Bond should be. Basically, Skyfall, horrific movie against all the rules of Bond, where this new movie, Spectre, it's got everything, man. It's got the right cars, it's got exotic location, things are blown up, there are women, it's not politically correct, and most important, M, as much as I love Judi Dench, and she's an incredible actress, she's not M. M is a crusty old man that's always pissed off. Anyway, enough of a review of the movie Spectre. Let's get back to driving on the roads in which they filmed Spectre. And that brings us to this whole knob thing here. Now, we've seen this on Mercedes before. Matter of fact, you and I spent a lot of time talking about the different dynamic driving controls. And here, this really isn't much different, but there are a couple of differences. So we've been driving in individual mode, which is kind of my favorite at this point. I know Mercedes is kind of the late to the game here on this one, but for me, one of the biggest things that I would use this for is running the engine in efficient mode, but the suspension in more of a sport setting, so you kind of mitigate the pitch, squat, dive, and roll. That's the biggest thing for me, at least. But now, notice, we've got this funny-looking white stuff on the side of the road here, and the actual road itself is wet. And that's where we have this slippery mode. And that changes a number of things in the driving dynamics, so we lose a little bit in terms of the suspension, but the biggest thing you notice is the responsiveness of the engine changes, because effectively you're starting out in second gear, and the engine it's basically, you don't feel like you can get as much power out of it as you would in, say, sport or even comfort mode. Now, if your transmission threw up, this is about what it would look like. Now, there's a couple of things going on here. Number one, there are a lot of extra gears here. Remember in our GLE 450 episode, we talked about a 9-speed transmission. Well, this is the 9-speed transmission. In that episode, we didn't get to see it naked like we do here. And there's a couple of things going on. Number one, this whole system works through a 4MATIC system. And number two, unlike the hipster cool thing to do nowadays, it's not 2 clutches, it is an old school torque converter. So going back to the GLS 500 and 550 in our country, well, what happens when you put almost 500 horsepower through this 9-gear system? So now here's the thing about Austria. You go through like these little towns, and then you get on these little country roads, and some of them look like a coiled snake, and you see these beautiful mountains, and you're like, this can't get any better. And then a couple of miles down the road, it gets better. I guess that's why Sam Mendes chose this area for parts of Spectre. And actually, for you major Bond fans, I don't know, I'm turning this more into a Bond thing, there have been many Bond films that actually have been filmed in Österreich. Again, I digress. And let's be honest, GLS, is this an entirely new vehicle? No. It really is a function of Mercedes Benz changing their whole naming structure. We talked about this in other episodes, where now they're trying to layer the SUVs with the sedan counterparts. So we've already driven the GLC, which is based on the C-Class. We've driven the GLE. Actually, that was the first one of the new naming structure that we drove, and that's based on the E-Class. So I will let you guys guess what the GLS is based on. But all of that aside, there are some changes in effectively a mid-cycle refresh. And the biggest technical change is the transmission. So we've driven this transmission before. We've driven it in the GLE 450, and we've driven it in the GLC. Now in the GLE 450, this transmission did a lot to mitigate 5,200 pounds. But here it does two things. Yeah, it does mitigate the extra weight of this vehicle, but now we have a much more powerful engine than the GLE 450. And I would argue that the 9-speed transmission, it gets that engine to be more powerful. Granted, the numbers don't change, but this is like the secret sauce in getting that power curve to be incredibly flat. So in summary, what do we got? Well, on the outside, not a hell of a lot of changes. But on the inside, or really underneath, a significant amount of changes. And what really Mercedes-Benz has done here is taken some of the investments from the GLE and some of the other lines and brought them here. Now, going into it, the GL, if I'm being honest, was probably one of the more balanced in terms of driving dynamics in the overall segment. But really, we need to put aside all of these changes because the segment is what's special here. And really think about this. A BMW 3 Series, for example, it competes against, what, 10, maybe 15 cars? There's no other segment like this where a vehicle competes against only 4, maybe 5 cars. And yes, this is more than double the price of a 3 Series, but still, like, you look at like Lamborghinis and Ferraris, there's more competition. So I need to turn this around to you guys because you guys know me, I'm a Lotus guy. I like small, unreliable cars that leave you stranded on the side of the road. It's fun to drive a big SUV with a big twin turbo V8, but I wouldn't know what to do with this thing. So my question is to the people that actually own cars like this, the Escalade, the Infiniti, the Range Rover, what is it you do with this car? What I want to know is, why would you buy this over one of those, or why wouldn't you? And for good measure, throw in, what are you doing with it? Do you have kids, dogs, rugrats, whatever it is, and what region of the world you live in? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all in word, MotoManTV all in word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with two things. Number one, make sure you download our fancy new mobile application from Apple iTunes and Google Play. And number two, the Tiroler Alpen, one of the most stunning places in the world. Okay, so before we go, I'm going to give you guys one bonus question here. What was your favorite Bond movie and why? I don't want to know which your favorite Bond because there's only one good Bond, or really the greatest Bond. There are some others that are okay, but there's one that is the greatest Bond. But tell me what your favorite Bond movie is and why. And maybe in an upcoming Ask MotoMan segment, I will tell you what mine is and why. Actually, I have two favorites. They're kind of like even, but we'll talk about that another day.